There are literally hundreds of videos online about cameras, about gear, lenses, lighting, but arguably the single most important aspect of a documentary that can make or break the whole thing is the interview, yet hardly anyone talks about it as a skill, even though it's one of the hardest parts to learn how to do well. So when I started making documentaries, I went back to all the theory I'd learned during my psychology degree, pulling tools from therapy, from eyewitness interviews, and even a little bit of interrogation techniques to really try and improve this myself. And I've now done probably hundreds of interviews where people genuinely have opened up to me about some of the most personal and traumatic moments in their lives. So in this video, I want to share some of the lessons that completely have changed how I approach interviews and how I help people open up on camera in ways that feel honest and natural. But before we get into the main bulk of the video, I want to talk to you about something first that genuinely completely changed how I view interviews in the first place, which is that a really wise mentor of mine told me that with interviews, you're not trying to take something from a person or coerce it out of them. You're just trying to create a space and a moment in time where they want to give it to you. So all of these tips are purely coming from a perspective of helping you facilitate that. They aren't tricks, and this isn't about manipulation. It's purely about showing you ways that you can help a contributor open up naturally to you. Because I really do believe that it's quite an honor and a privilege to be able to use our skills as filmmakers to help tell someone's story or to share someone's ideas and capture that moment in time for them. And therefore, we really need to treat that with the utmost respect in terms of the process and how we approach these conversations. However, I am slightly going to contradict everything I'm about to tell you by saying that none of the rest of the video matters if you don't do these few things before you actually start the interview itself. Doing interviews is complicated because you're spinning so many plates all at once. You've usually got a time limit, sometimes a lot of pressure with clients or agencies in the room, and in the back of your mind, you're always thinking, how will this cut together in the edit? You want natural, honest responses, but you also need to keep on track, and you need a clear agenda, but you don't want it to feel like you're just reading a list of questions or running an interrogation. So it's this balance of control and freedom. So the way I manage all that is by prepping as much as possible before the cameras even start to roll. So I'll always map out the theme of the film and ideally a rough narrative shape too. And from there, I'll make sure to base my questions around that structure and framework and then put them in a rough schedule that matches up to the time of the interview that I've got, so I can see where I should be in the conversation at different points and make sure I don't run out of time or rush through really important stuff. And everyone does interviews slightly differently, but for me, I always bring a notebook. I don't like using my phone because it just feels a bit cold on the receiving end, like you're checking messages instead of listening to someone. I have a notebook with my questions and those rough timings written out, which just gives me something to glance at and stay on track, but also leaves me free to kind of follow interesting threads when they do come up. And it's that combination of planning and flexibility that helps me to manage all the natural chaos and still keep the conversation feeling as natural as possible. So building trust, I think, is without a doubt the most important part of this whole process. And you can use all the techniques in the world that you like, but you'll never get the vulnerability and emotional depth and openness of a contributor without first establishing trust. It doesn't matter if it's a documentary or an interview with a celebrity or a politician or a gardener from down the road or a victim of some kind of trauma, anyone. Building trust is the absolute key to be able to talk about anything below the surface during an interview. So then how do we go about building that trust, particularly under time constraints and often very unideal conditions and situations? So I'll always try and just spend some casual time with a contributor before the interview with no pressure or agenda, just getting to know them a little bit and start to establish a rapport with them. and being present with them, being curious and being open. Obviously, the more time you can spend together before the cameras roll, the better. But even if you only get that little bit of time before the interview itself, whilst the crew is setting up and getting ready, which is often the way with some jobs, if you really take the time to just get to know them a little bit and build a rapport with them, it can make all the difference. And when a contributor can connect with you on a personal level and not just see you as someone there to ask them questions for whatever the project is you're making, it makes having a genuine conversation much easier. Then the next thing I always do is be completely honest and open and transparent about my intentions. So, why are you making the project? What do you want to achieve? What do you want the audience to understand? Because I think if people can see and know your intentions are honest and good, they're much more likely to open up to you and trust that what they are giving you and saying to you will be protective and also is serving a good purpose. Then, lastly, if the topics we're discussing are very serious or traumatic, I will always talk about trauma-informed consent. So having a joint agreement on what we're going to be discussing and what they're comfortable or not comfortable talking about, and that they are completely free to stop at any point. This again just adds to this idea of building trust and making the contributor feel as much as possible like they're protected and in a safe situation. Then once we've done all of that, we can then get into the room itself. A really underrated aspect of interviews is how much the environment impacts things itself. Ideally, you want somewhere quiet and private so that you're not interrupted. And then you have to judge this one a little bit on the contributor's character. But if it's someone that's never been on camera before or on a film set, I'll always try to show them what's going on and why we're doing certain things as we're setting up, because there's nothing worse than someone walking into like their own living room with loads of lights and 10 people standing around and being completely frozen and intimidated by it all. So getting them involved in the process just gently eases them into that situation. And then I'll try and have as minimal crew in the room itself during the interview as I possibly can. Literally, ideally, just me and the DP, because my goal by the end of that whole process is to just try and make it feel like the contributor is sitting there having a casual chat with me at a coffee table in their house, somewhere safe, private, and comfortable. Once we've done all of that, we can then get into the specifics of the interview itself. This first point is more of an overall point about your persona and demeanor whilst conducting an interview. And it's taken from person-centered therapy and also kind of FBI rapport building. And it's essentially the opposite of interrogation, where you're not forcing something out of someone. You're again trying to get them to come to you instead. So mirroring is about subtle mimicry, copying body positions or using their language, reflecting back key words. So if they say that they felt trapped, I'll just ask, when you say trapped, what do you mean? And I'll try to match their energy and tone. And it's not mimicking, it's just trying to be in rhythm with a person. So nodding and tracking and encouraging without fully steering them somewhere. And when I got told this, first of all, I kind of thought it was a bit like woo-woo, to be honest. But the more I did it, the more I found people were able to just naturally get into that rhythm with me and flow naturally in the conversation. And it's almost like you're syncing up with them. And again, I think the point is to make them feel heard and subconsciously connected with you so that they naturally open up and naturally go where you're trying to take them. My intention with every interview is just to try and make it feel as much like having a genuine, natural conversation as possible. So I always start very low stakes. I never kind of go, tell me a life story. That's just very overwhelming to most people. So like lots of softballs first, just getting them used to sitting there, talking naturally. Because for a lot of people, this whole experience is completely alien to them. I'll ask them something they don't have to think too hard about, but that starts them on the road to where the conversation is going to go. And then I'll ease them into the topic that we're getting to, again, as kind of naturally and conversationally as possible. So it's like you're laying the first brick of a wall. And once that brick is down, they can build on the rest of it. And you'll start to feel them easing into things, forgetting about the lights and the camera and the people. And that's when you can start heading down the road you want to head down. But you need to use a bit of judgment on this one, on how long it might take someone to get there, because everyone's different. But it's really important to do that because it forms the kind of foundation of the interview, and you can't build anything good from weak foundations. When you're interviewing, you have to remember that memory is really fragile. And if you kind of fire too many questions at people too quickly, people tend to stay very surface level. So the clarity of what you're asking is extremely important too, where I try to stick to simple, singular questions. If you start kind of flapping about too much or too wordy or ask too many things in succession, not only does it kind of get people more flustered and they have to think more about what you're actually asking rather than just answering instinctively, but they also might get on their back foot about feeling more potentially manipulated or like you are trying to coerce them or interrogate them into saying something. And the sequence you ask questions in matters too. So factual, then reflective, then emotional, which is the way that our memory naturally works. So, for example, factual can be, where were you when you found out about X? And then reflective can be, did you see that coming? Did you know that was going to happen? And then you go to emotional, which can be, how did that make you feel in the moment? So you're not asking them to just recite facts. You're kind of trying to get them to relive that experience. Emotional anchoring is another tool from witness interview studies. Abstract feelings are quite hard to talk about sometimes, but if you ground them in a place or a moment first, they start to become more vivid for people. So instead of, how did that happen? I might ask people, where were you when this happened? Or try and prompt them with details about the experience and what did the room smell like? Or what was the first thing you noticed when you came in that day? To try and get them to start stepping into those different senses. And those sensory anchors can help pull people back into memories. And suddenly they're not just describing something, they're really reliving it themselves. And you capture something much more real and authentic by helping take them back to that memory and exploring it with you. And sometimes it only takes one single well-timed question to cut right through to the heart of what they're feeling. This is a really simple but very powerful one that I use all the time, which is, if someone opens up to me in kind of an unexpected way, I'll just gently ask, why do you think this is coming up now? Which helps them start to connect the dots between the past and the present moment, which is where kind of our true internal revelations start to appear out of nowhere sometimes. But also as an audience, it's where the kind of true nuggets or sound bites often appear. Even just why is a question I often keep in my back pocket and use extremely frequently, but in the right moment, when I can sense that someone is ready to explore a little deeper, it just pushes people a little further than they would normally explore on their own. And some of the most powerful moments I've ever experienced in interviews are just simply by asking why at the right moment. This one comes from some fantastic research on therapist techniques, which is that people naturally want to fill silence. And often the deeper the silence, the more honest what comes after. So when someone says something really raw and emotional, I don't just jump in. I don't rush into the next question. I just try and hold that space. And it might feel really awkward at first, but sometimes those extra like 3 or 4 seconds are where these incredible moments happen as people dig deeper to fill that void and have a moment to analyze their own thoughts. And it doesn't always work. It definitely depends on the person or situation and the kind of flow of the interview. But similar to the why question that we talked about before, just holding on those moments of silence a few seconds longer than feels comfortable has absolutely led to some of the most powerful interview moments for me. When I do finish an interview, I don't really think about if we got the perfect soundbite or the perfect moment that I wanted. I honestly just think about what it meant for the person who I've shared that time with. Often people have never had a conversation like that or in that way, in that depth. And going back to what I said at the start, I really think we need to treat that with a lot of care and respect. And I've definitely not done this entire process perfectly at times. So if you want to hear me talk about the first doc that I ever made, you can watch me self-chastise in this video here, but please do let me know in the comments how you guys feel about interviews too, and if this has been helpful for you.